Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hot Mama's Cool Planet, the sustainable wellness podcast where two lifelong hot friends talk about caring for ourselves, our families, our planet, with humor, honesty, and maybe just a little bit of ranting along the way. Today, we are joined by Jinan Banna, who we will introduce fully later on, but right now, I want to immediately get to our tiny pleasures. And for me, I'm going to go first because I'll give you guys a little bit of time to think about what your tiny pleasure of the week was. But I'm going to tell you about the little sprouts that are coming up in my little pots on my windowsill that I can't wait to go and move into my garden once it gets warm enough. I was just telling you both right before we started this podcast about the time that the slugs went and ate my cucumber that I had been carefully nurturing and growing, but this time it's all going to be different. So I had some just store-bought peppers and tomatoes, and I kind of squeezed their seeds out into a little pot on my windowsill, and they are sprouting, and I am so proud of myself. It's just like springtime and life is coming forth, and how cool is that?
Wow, that sounds so cute, little sprouts. And I always wonder, like, can you just use the seeds in the food you buy to actually and grow stuff? And I guess it works.
Yeah, totally. A couple of years ago, I had butternut squashes growing in my garden. That was just from, dinner one night. And this time peppers and two different kinds of tomatoes are going on. So, and we grew sunflowers one year, which for 2 years after that, we kept growing the tallest, like big 10-foot sunflowers. And that was such a success. So, hooray for gardening when you really don't know what the heck you're doing. What about you, Miechie? What's your tiny pleasure for the week?
My tiny pleasure was, it was more of a tiny pleasure inside a bigger pleasure as I went on a hike with my 11-year-old who had spring break, and we saw two snakes on the hike. He saw a garden snake with really bright colors, and then on the way back I almost stepped on a little baby rattlesnake. Ooh. That he saw that I didn't see. And then we were walking along and he's like, I never realized that the word for the Ekans creatures in Pokemon is snake spelled backwards. So that was my tiny pleasure of him just like connecting the digital world with the outside world and us having fun outdoors. So yeah.
That is such a cool thing to watch somebody like have that light bulb go off, right?
Yeah. What about you, Jinan?
I think for me, my tiny pleasure is always the same. It's just walking. I really love to be outside and just have a lot of joy from the nice nature and sky. So really love my walks.
I love walking and hiking and moving my body around outdoors. So in the springtime, especially, it's really nice right now. So, all right, let's get to our exciting topic this week, which I have titled Making Sense of MAHA's New Dietary Guidelines for America. We can work out that title later if we think that doesn't quite fit, but we have an expert here to talk with us about that. Nutrition professor Jinan Banna, who is a nutrition scientist and researcher whose research focuses on nutrition education, community nutrition, nutritional epidemiology, dietetics, and program evaluation. She is the prodigious author of many studies and peer-reviewed publications and is a full professor of nutrition science at the University of Hawaii. And she's with us for the second time on our podcast. We're so happy to have her back and here to help us make sense of things. So did you want to add anything to that bio?
No, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Welcome back, Jinan. I can't wait to hear your reactions to the new dietary guidelines.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. So, all right. So a few months ago, I was really excited to learn and a little bit confused also to learn about the new dietary guidelines that came out from MAHA. And for me, it was just a lot, looking at the diagram of what it looks like. We'll get into that, but other people might have other questions about it. And first of all, maybe we should just describe what those guidelines are so people understand what they are in a basic way. So could you help us with that, Jinan? Just describe what the new guidelines are?
Sure. So generally what the dietary guidelines are a set of guidelines to help Americans understand how to get what they need from their diet for health and also to prevent disease. And those guidelines are really important because they form the basis for nutrition education. Healthcare professionals are using those guidelines to give advice. They also form the basis for what foods can be given in programs like the National School Lunch Program and programs like WIC. So they really are a foundation for many different programs and sets of information that are given to the public, and a really key thing when it comes to healthy eating in the U.S.
Okay. So how are those guidelines different from what we had before? And in our previous podcast, we talked about food groups and the evolution of the diagrams for food groups in different countries. But just within the U.S., how is it different from the MyPlate and what came before the pyramid, even before that?
So we now have a flipped pyramid, and we have a different way of outlining things, quite different from the plate that you mentioned. So the previous plate had half the plate fruits and vegetables, whole grains, protein, and dairy pictured. And now we have the pyramid with the foods at the top being protein, dairy, and healthy fats. We also have fruits and vegetables prominently featured on that flipped pyramid, and we've got whole grains way at the bottom. So it's a different way of thinking about how we should eat for health.
How are you feeling about this?
So there are a lot of things to consider, really. I think there are some things that are quite positive. So there is an explicit mention of limiting consumption of processed food in these guidelines. So I think that's a really positive thing. Of course, the guidelines have always emphasized whole foods and plant-based foods, but now there's this explicit mention of this, which I think is helpful because we know that these highly processed foods make up a big part of the American diet, and they can be really high in sugar, salt, saturated fat, and low in nutrients. So I think that's quite a positive thing. They're also
So are those at like the very tip of the pyramid, at the very bottom, all these processed foods and sugars and whatnot?
So actually on the new flipped pyramid, they are not pictured at all, which is interesting.
I see.
So that's somewhat of a departure from some of the previous graphics, which did show some of these foods at the very tip of the pyramid. None of those foods were pictured on the MyPlate graphic, so in that sense, it's kind of the same idea of emphasizing those whole foods, while there is a mention of the limiting processed foods in the guidelines, in the text that accompanies the graphic.
I see. So it's not in the graphic, but it explicitly says so. Okay.
Right.
All right. How effective is that?
Focus on the positive a little bit before maybe we get into some of the more critical questions I have about this. So one thing I thought was cool when I was just recently, before our podcast, looking up on the website is the focus on childhood, protecting children from chronic diseases later in life. So a longer view of nutrition, and they had this life expectancy chart, like comparing U.S. Life expectancy with other countries and how it's lower in some cases. And so I thought, okay, yes, we don't pay enough attention to chronic diseases like heart disease, cancer, and so cool, they're focusing on nutrition for that. So, and how are they doing that? Through not eating processed food.
Okay.
So sounds good. That all sounds good.
Anything else you like about the new inverted pyramid?
I do like that there's a focus on fruits and vegetables, so that's of course along the same lines as MyPlate and along the same lines as many of the previous graphics. This has generally been dietary advice for throughout the time that it has been provided. So the fruits and vegetables are towards the top of the pyramid. They're prominently featured. That's very positive. And it's also a consumer-friendly way of presenting the guidelines. So It's a very short document to give the very basic advice, which I think is helpful. So those are some of the things that I thought were positive. There's an emphasis on whole foods as well. So we mentioned that we don't see any of those highly processed foods on the pyramid itself. And just the general emphasis on plants, which I think is a good thing.
Okay. Now we can switch a little bit to the more negative. Just this morning when I was looking at this pyramid, I don't think if I were a kid in school and I had never seen the previous pyramid, I would never understand that I'm supposed to eat less of the upside down triangle stuff at the bottom than what's at the top. So I was really inspired looking at it. I haven't had oatmeal for breakfast in a really long time, but I was like, that bowl of oatmeal down there, that looks really good. I think I'll have a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast.
That's
even
the
though
opposite of what they were intending.
Right, they want you to eat less carbs, less grains, and more protein and meats and vegetables at the top. So yeah, that's one thing that is just confusing. Like you kind of lose the sense of different food groups in it, like their meaning and proportion to one another and what they mean. Do you agree with that, Jinan? Or
yeah, what are you hearing from your constituency or the people who you work with? Are they confused?
Yeah, I generally agree that it is a bit confusing. So, or possibly quite confusing in terms of the fact that we really do want to emphasize whole grains, so they shouldn't be a minor part of the diet. Most Americans don't get enough fiber, and whole grains are an important source. They're also a source of B vitamins, so really something to emphasize and include in the diet. And yes, definitely, I think that many health professionals are commenting that many of the aspects of the pyramid are confusing. So, of course, it's been said that the foods at the top, some of those foods, such as the red meat, are high in saturated fat, while there is a stated limit of 10% of calories from saturated fat in the guidelines, if you look at the words that accompany the graphic. So, yes, I would say that having some of those foods at the top is really not ideal in terms of helping consumers to understand that they should have that balance. So that's why I myself really like the My Plate graphic. I think it gives a plate representation, which is a common thing that people put food on, so we can kind of understand, okay, how much of the plate should be what aspect of the different food groups that make up the diet.
So it sounds like the visuals are contradicting the text, and I'm wondering if I'm trying to understand whether you're assuming that was like an oops or it was an on purpose kind of a thing. Like is there something nefarious going on here? And I'm guessing that more people are likely to look at the graphic than they are to read the text. And so what do you make of this?
Yeah, it's an interesting contradiction in terms of the issue with saturated fat. And I think part of the confusion also stems from the fact that some of the foods that are high in saturated fat, such as dairy, actually have a lot of health benefits and have not necessarily been shown to increase risk of heart disease and increase cholesterol levels. So some of those full-fat dairy products really can be a very healthy part of the diet and something to emphasize, while at the same time we do want to limit saturated fat from other sources such as the beef, for example, or butter. So, of course, again, not all dairy products are created equal. That's another thing to note. So it gets a little bit confusing when it comes to the discussion around saturated fat. Generally, we want to limit it overall, but there are certain foods that are high in saturated fat that do have quite a few health benefits and really can be emphasized in the diet. So that may be where part of that confusion is stemming from.
When I look at the diagram and it says like eat real food again at the top, and I think of this trend of I think it's especially popular among men to like eat more meat, eat more protein, and this kind of like He-Man trend in nutrition online and on all the sources where social media where people get their nutrition information these days. So it feels like to me like that diagram is kind of part of that in a way somehow, by sticking these huge steaks at the top, as if you're supposed to eat steak all the time over other food. I don't know if you all agree with that or what your thoughts are.
Yeah, from where I'm sitting here in the UK, and so I've been catching a bit of this new chart, but I don't know that I'm getting everything you all are. But from where I'm sitting, it sounds like it was very much the love child of RFK Jr. And I'm wondering, obviously he couldn't have come up with the whole thing by himself, of course. So I'm wondering if you have any inside knowledge of how this was developed and like what sorts of people were consulted. Or is it really just coming out of this kind of like bro culture, muscle man in jeans kind of thing?
So there is a committee who gives recommendations, the set of recommendations that are then considered, and there's an opportunity for public comment. So it's a group of scientists who give these recommendations, and then the public comment is taken into account. And then from there, of course, there is another step in the process in which the recommendations are reviewed and the guidelines are developed. So in this case, there was a little bit less clarity as to what the whole process was when it comes to creating the final set of guidelines while taking into account what that set of scientists said as well as public comment. But that's generally the process that is followed. So I think this time there are some questions around how exactly the final set of guidelines was developed.
Did you have the opportunity to comment back? Like why would I have heard about it here? But I didn't know that you had that opportunity.
That's right. There is an opportunity for public comment, so it's a good thing for people to keep in mind. I myself didn't comment for this round of guidelines, but that is something that is definitely available.
Huh. Well, that's good. I'm glad that they take people's opinions into consideration, or say that they do.
So, let's see, what else did I want to ask you about? So, is there anything else about these new guidelines that you think might be confusing for the public?
There are a few more things that definitely could be confusing. So with regards to added sugar, so there is a mention of further limiting added sugar, more so than the previous set of guidelines. And in this case, it's stated that no amount of added sugar is recommended and that one should consume no more than 10 grams of added sugar per meal, which I think is a difficult thing to understand how to implement. So, of course, consuming no added sugar would be, first of all, a very difficult thing. It would be hard to figure out how to do that. If you eat at a restaurant, that would be probably a nearly impossible task. And of course, people also don't think in terms of meals and in the number of grams they're consuming per meal. So yes, I believe that can be confusing. However, I am generally in agreement that it's a good thing to, of course, limit added sugar as much as possible. It's a source of empty calories, but creates some confusion for sure.
So again, there's some details in the writing that aren't really coming through in what most of the public will generally see. It seems like.
That's right. So some of that text that accompanies the graphic really can be quite confusing when it comes to actual daily living.
So how are you working with this with the people that you're working with? How are you using this new graphic? Are you required to? And how do you explain it to them?
I have not used the new graphic so far, and I really am a big advocate for my plate. I think that's just such an easy way to explain to people how to eat. So if I were to talk about our dietary guidelines, I may also reference my plate, and maybe one way to go about it. So let the public know that, of course, this is our new graphic, but we also have another way of thinking about it, which I myself find very handy as a nutrition professional. So I think that's the way I would generally approach it. I think it's really about just figuring out how to convey those messages of balance, moderation, adequacy, and variety, and making sure that the graphic really aligns with those. So that would be one thought about how I might approach this.
But it sounds like it doesn't really align with the balance part of this new graphic, and so that's why you're having to revert to, pairing it with the old graphic, which that doesn't sound like that sounds like itself would be very confusing.
Yes, I agree. I think I would agree that the balance aspect is not quite reflected in the new graphic in terms of really making sure that we get enough of that fiber, and we want that from different sources, not just the fruits and vegetables. And I think that people can also have difficulty with the pyramid, as we've said, figuring out how does this really play out in daily life. So if I have a meal, what proportion of all these different foods should be on my plate?
Yeah.
Definitely difficult.
So another aspect of nutrition that I myself am really interested in the nutrition app that I'm building and game, Fruity, which I talk about sometimes on this podcast, is sustainability. And for my research with that game, I've looked into some landmark studies about nutrition and food's environmental impact on the environment. And so just to list a few of those, I looked at, I especially found Poor and Nemesic's 2018 study useful. It very clearly shows the impact of different foods, consumers' food choices. And they are an Oxford scientist and a Swiss institute that conducted this study. And then there's also a German institute, the Potsdam Institute, that does climate impact research, and they were correlating the nutritional outcomes of your food choices on your health as well as the outcomes on the environment, and seeing how those come together in different ways. And so those are just to list a few things that I found really useful. I know that you are also interested in sustainability and food choices, and so do these new guidelines have any mention at all of this kind of research in them?
So there is no explicit mention of sustainability when it comes to the diet in the guidelines. However, there is a mention of whole plant foods, emphasizing plants, which is an aspect of sustainability. Of course, this is a very complex topic, and there are many different dimensions of sustainability. If we think about human health and impact on the environment, if you think about economic sustainability, there are many different ways to think about it. How culturally appropriate are the foods that a population is eating, and how does that play into this idea of sustainability? So I think that mention of plant foods is one positive aspect. Of course, in high-income countries, that's particularly relevant in terms of having a sustainable diet. But of course, we have a lot of information missing when it comes to that. And some of the foods at the top of the pyramid have a relatively high environmental footprint, such as that meat that we see there. So not quite reflected in terms of what we would like to see with regards to sustainability.
So how can somebody follow these guidelines and still be sustainable in their food choices? Is that possible?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and of course very context dependent, so there's no one answer with regards to how to consume a sustainable diet. But certainly in the US, consuming plant-based foods, emphasizing plant-based foods, is a good way to think about one aspect of having a sustainable diet. We could also think about not wasting food, and that could include overconsumption, so really making sure that we're not eating too much, which is another form of waste. So those would be a few things that come to mind.
Mm-hmm. I'm also thinking of, we talked about this when we did the Food Groups podcast, the Harvard Medical School's guidelines, which included in their protein area, it's very similar to My Plate, but they included plant-based proteins, which is really helpful. So, this diagram really emphasizes steak. Steak is like the biggest food on it. Takes up the most space.
Yeah, so how do
we now
like
know
us deal with
that beef has a huge environmental impact even compared to other meats. So this doesn't seem to be going in a really helpful direction, at least, if you just look at the diagram.
Yeah,
and even looking, there's no research related to that type of, in their sources. I don't think they source any sustainability nutrition research.
Yeah, I would say definitely for us in the U.S., it is not desirable to feature the steak. Really we should be, as you said, incorporating those plant-based source foods especially in the protein food group, I would agree. And we do see that we have beans and rice pictured there. We have some nuts, so it's nice that those foods are incorporated. And of course, again, we should really highlight that this is really context specific. So, in world areas where people may not be getting enough iron and zinc, of course, a piece of meat may be a very important part of the diet. But if we're thinking about our context in the U.S., certainly we want to be shifting away from eating a meat-heavy diet, because we know that we already do that and we don't need so much, and we need more fiber. So eating those beans and rice is a really good way to accomplish that.
Yeah, it does seem really, really heavy on the animal protein, and and I'm 99% vegetarian. So, what message are they trying to send to me, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's a very good point as well, that all of these foods don't fit everyone's diet, especially those who are emphasizing those plant-based foods, which I think is very desirable. So it would be a really good thing to have some further explanation, or help people to understand how they can meet their needs in each food group, which I guess they've partially accomplished by featuring the beans and rice. But thinking back to my plate again, I really appreciated the way that you could go on the myplate.gov website, and you could look at each food group, and you could look at all the different options in each one of those food groups, and the vegetarian options were definitely featured. So I think you really kind of need to dig in, as you said, to understand how you can meet your nutritional needs in each one of these food groups, rather than just relying on the foods that are prominently featured in the diagram.
You mentioned that people's different cultural influences, context when they're making nutrition choices. And I'm wondering if the new diagram is skewed towards a certain type of American, that because I know that, when I look at it and I see meat over here and then potatoes over here, is it trying to appeal to, is it part of this kind of go back to American values when white people ate meat and potatoes kind of thing? Or how does it represent other Americans who have other cultural tastes, or does it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think a big limitation of graphics that feature foods is really coming out here, and we could think of that limitation being that, of course, many people are going to eat foods that are dishes that are mixed and have different items from different food groups, so we're not able to see perhaps what kind of foods would be featured in someone's diet realistically. We have individual food items, and these are selected based on someone's idea of what foods Americans may be consuming, but it really doesn't help people to understand how perhaps a dish that might have many ingredients and be part of their cultural foodways would be included in the diet. So yes, I think once again, if we think about my plate and the fact that we didn't have any particular foods pictured, I think that has some advantages. Of course, it might also have some disadvantages in terms of people being confused as to what foods are in the protein group. But when you don't picture any foods, you leave people some ability to imagine how the foods that they consume might be included in that particular food group. So yes, a difficult thing to figure out how to portray in these graphics.
One thing that's occurring to me as we're talking about this is that this new graphic is not a data visualization. It's not actually, I don't think it's meant to show quantity. I think it's meant to show importance. And so the importance of steak is huge to the population that this is speaking to. And, and the importance of whole grains is just, well, that's just, your left-wing hippie granola vegetarian speaking, right? And so I don't think it's meant to, I'm just talking through it here, but I don't think it's meant to say you should be eating this vast quantity of steak. I think it's just saying steak is really an important, it's the most essential American thing you can do. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think generally the visual is to help you understand what foods to emphasize, and I think the message to me is that these foods at the top are foods to really include in the diet, include regularly. So I think it can definitely be problematic when we think about meeting our nutritional needs, particularly in the U.S.
It's also
What
really
about
interesting.
in the Eat Well, Mur, you live in the UK, so tell us about Eat Well. You have an alternate diagram there.
Yeah, I was gonna. I followed up. Okay, so after our last conversation a few months ago, I remember being like, "Gosh, what does Britain have? I don't know." And I looked it up, and of course, we have something called the Eat Well Guide, which indeed I have seen all over the place. It's at my GP, my general practitioner's office. It's at every NHS clinic. My daughter has been taught it at school. It's just such an insidious part of living here that I kind of hadn't really noticed it. But the Eat Well Guide is quite similar to my plate. It's on what looks like a plate, kind of a graphic, and it's split up into it's more of a data visualization in that it's meant to be proportional and, eat more of this, less of that. I also really like that it includes some non-animal-based protein choices in there. It has like tofu and beans and things pictured. So it's very similar to my plate. Have you had a chance to look at it, Jinan?
Yes, I have. And
what did you think?
I agree that to me this is a more useful representation of generally how we should set up the diet to get the right amount from the different food groups. I think it's a clearer way of visualizing that. It's more practical, answers the question of when I sit down to eat a meal, what should I actually put on my plate? So to me, that's clearer than a pyramid.
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting talking about whether or not it should have actual pictures of the foods in the graphic. I've been thinking about this for a completely different project, but as a user researcher, I'm often running into the problems of if we show people a picture of something, that's exactly what they expect to get. If they click on that, that's what they're going to see. And oftentimes these pictures are shown as just an example of the array of things you might choose. And so it's tough. It's always a really tough choice. Like, do you show them the picture to get them in the right frame of mind, or is that limiting them to just what they see in that picture?
Or do you show them an abstract icon that's more generalized and somewhere in between? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
the
what
kind
the
of
solution
user design
is.
questions that I'm not sure. I was like, what artist designed this diagram or graphic designers designed this diagram? Because it is really confusing, the new MAHA.
That's why I was wondering about
just
the process
even,
and who was involved.
Overview of it. It's like it's like you have an overview of everything and it all looks like the same kind of. It's just this pile of food. Like you took your grocery bag and you poured it onto your table and made it into a triangle shape. And you're like, okay, now I'm supposed to know what to do with this. So
yeah, I think that there's really no perfect graphic too. And there's definitely one of the things that we do in one of my community nutrition classes is we talk about the graphics that accompany the dietary guidelines. So we have an activity for My Plate in which we talk about the advantages and disadvantages. It's a very difficult thing to give people instruction as to how they should generally be eating. So I like the topic. It's a fun thing to think about. How would you explain to someone what a healthy diet looks like?
Yeah.
Do you think in your work you're going to be required to use this graphic and not revert back to My Plate as needed?
I guess it depends. I'm trying to think about the different scenarios in which I might use the graphic, or need to use such a graphic. If I were to give a presentation for the public, that would be one case in which I might want to present a graphic and help people understand how to eat a healthy diet. But of course, this graphic really underlies, everything we do as nutrition professionals. So we're going to be referencing these guidelines really in all aspects of our job. Whether we might be showing this graphic or using it in presentations, of course, would really depend on the situation, but the dietary guidelines really do inform our work quite a bit, so I might be using the guidelines in general in a variety of different contexts.
I really liked how you started with the positives.
If you need to use the guidelines? How can you translate that into simple choices at the grocery store when people are planning meals?
We really use this message of emphasizing plant-based foods. So of course those are really featured prominently in the pyramid, and I think that this is one message that I could give people. And then really, again, coming back to that balance, reminding people of the various food groups, so thinking of the fruits and vegetables, the whole grains, the protein, and including those dairy foods if they choose to consume dairy, and reminding them that those foods should be really consumed in a balance. So as they're in the grocery store, they can think in terms of food groups. I really like to help people understand that they need a variety of foods in each one of the groups. So I think giving that kind of guidance might be a really helpful thing as people are shopping, and then reminding them to eat those whole foods. So again, staying away from those ultra-processed items in general. Of course, it's fine to include some, but emphasizing whole foods is a really important message.
That is a good message.
Yeah, this does a good job of emphasizing the whole foods and avoiding processed. But I don't think it does a good job of explaining what the food groups are.
Yeah, it's not very clear, really. Also the words that are on the graphic, so protein, healthy fat, dairy. So from that, it is confusing. What are the food groups here when I'm thinking about how to balance my plate? Fruits and vegetables are mentioned and whole grains are mentioned, but overall there is still a bit of a confusing message when it comes to the food groups.
Oh, another one that I thought was a positive from this, but I would love your take on it because it's a little controversial maybe, is that it finally emphasizes fat as being potentially healthy, healthy fat. Whereas in the past, I think all of the dietary guidelines have said you should avoid fat. But now it's finally saying, there are healthy fats. And like you were saying earlier, like dairy that's high fat is seeming to be fine. Yeah, what do you think? Do you think healthy fat is healthy?
Yeah, generally this has been a part of our dietary guidance that we should emphasize unsaturated fats, limit saturated fats. So yes, this general idea that particular types of fat are healthy is really not a new concept. And I think that, of course, it is important to emphasize that. So to help people to understand that they shouldn't be afraid of oil in the diet, that it should be they should be emphasizing these unsaturated sources of fat, and of course that there is still ongoing research when it comes to various aspects of the diet. So we talked about dairy. There will still be more research in that area to understand the difference when it comes to health between the full-fat dairy and the lower-fat dairy. So that's something to consider, that we are still always learning more, but for now we don't have good evidence to show that full-fat dairy is harming health, and it can be included as part of a healthy diet. So definitely I think that is generally a helpful message to really emphasize healthy fats and help people to incorporate that.
Okay, well, awesome. We got some pros and we got a lot of cons, but there are a few pros. So, all right. Is there anything else, Jinan, that you would like to share with our listeners about, these new guidelines?
I think that just really giving it a read. So if you can look through the whole document, it's a brief document presented for the public. So I think that's a really helpful thing to just go through, read the text that accompanies the graphic, and then maybe look at some of the past guidelines as well, and get an understanding of how things were previously presented, and think about how the guidelines fit with your own diet. So of course there are lots of different ways to meet your needs in each one of the food groups. So you mentioned vegetarian, dietary pattern, which is a great way to go about it. So it's all about really understanding how your food preferences and your nutritional needs can fit with this new graphic, and really enjoying your food. I always emphasize that point. We want to enjoy our food always.
That's the best part.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, that was such a diplomatic explanation of these new dietary guidelines, when I know you're a huge fan of My Plate, and I suspect that these new guidelines, are a bit of a letdown compared to the one that you're really into. So thank you for sharing both the pros and cons, and I was really pleased that you started with the pros. I think that you opened my eyes that there is actually quite a lot to appreciate about these guidelines, despite whatever faults it may have. So thank you for being such a diplomat.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So we like to end our program with talking about our intentions for the week. And my intention for the coming week is to avoid processed food, especially sugars. Avoid added sugars. I've been really overdoing it in the processed sugar department lately, and I think that this hopefully has been the conversation exactly that I needed to kind of kickstart myself back into having it be a sometimes treat and not an everyday, every meal treat. All right, what about you, Miechie? What's your intention for the week?
I had a different one, but now I just want to borrow yours. Can I do that?
Yeah, why not? There's enough to go around.
I realized, like, over the winter, I got sort of addicted to sweet chocolate, and I'm trying to come off my chocolate addiction. So, I mean, chocolate is healthy in limited amounts, but the problem is it's sort of addictive, and then you just want more and more every single day.
Oh, Miechie, but you did that wonderful podcast about chocolate. I just assumed.
I know. I do. That was when I was in full throes chocolate addiction mode. But yeah. So I'm just, having less, and actually just not having a little chocolate break. Not that chocolate's all bad, and you can find sustainable chocolates and all that, but yes, I'm having a little break from chocolate, and it's spring, and I don't need chocolate quite as much. That's my.
What
intention.
about you, Jinan? Do you have an intention for the week?
I'll say something along the same lines then, since we're talking about sugar. Maybe my intention will be to try yet another healthy dessert. So I have been experimenting with different ingredients like sweet potato. I made some sweet potato bars with oatmeal and maple syrup, which turned out really tasty and healthy. I topped it with some raspberries. So my intention is to try yet another new recipe.
That
I
sounds
was
awesome.
looking at that Hawaiian Japanese cookbook you gave me, Jinan, that has a dessert recipe for like purple sweet potatoes. That looks really cool, but yeah. That's what I was
We did
thinking
an
of
episode recently on desserts, like high protein desserts that you can make, and anyway, I'm going to go back and listen to it once more with feeling.
Okay, so I guess we're ending on a sweet note.
Or a sweet, but not overly sweet note.
Yes,
right?
healthy sweet.
Healthy sweet note, just where we want to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it was awesome to see you both, and we will see all of our lovely viewers next time on Hot Mama's Cool Planet. Bye.
Bye.